Welcome to the About Sex podcast. I'm Joshua Skirtu, and with me as always is my lovely wife, Angela Skirtu. Hi, Angela.
Hi, Joshua.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Tell them who you are.
So I am an ASEX certified sex therapist and a Missouri licensed marriage and family therapist.
Nice. And who's our guest today?
Today we have with us Megan Garza. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist as well, a certified specialty trauma care supervisor with experience working in the mental health and violence against women field since 1999. She works as an individual and group therapist treating sexual trauma survivors as the lead therapist for the YWCA Women's Resource Center. And she also works for Behavioral Health Response as a mobile outreach crisis counselor. So we'll stop there if that's okay. But if anything I missed that is important, please let us know.
No, that's great.
Because she actually has a huge paragraph, by the way, of all of her amazing accomplishments. We would call her the Wonder Woman of the therapy field.
Yeah, I'm told I'm very verbose in writing.
Sounds good. So, good to meet you, Megan.
Good to meet you guys too.
Good to have you here.
So we wanted to start out with a little random something today. Talk a little bit about Hawaii.
Oh, yeah. What happened in Hawaii, Josh? Tell us.
So I posted it on our last episode. I posted it in the blog. If you go to aboutsexpodcast.com, I always post a little blog with each episode. And in the blog, I talk about how that morning I got a call from my family. Multiple family members called me because they all live in Hawaii. They're all in Honolulu, Hawaii. And they all told me they're about to die.
Yeah, and it wasn't a drill.
And it wasn't, well, no, it wasn't a drill. It was a mistake, but you're getting to the punchline.
No.
You're bad at storytelling,
Sorry, guys.
apparently.
I screwed it up.
So they called me and they said, we just got emergency alert that says that a missile is inbound to Hawaii. And that's a very specific thing to get in your on your phone. And it popped on everybody's phone across the entire state. And they were all screaming and crying.
Apparently people were
terrifying.
running from the island. It was,
Yeah,
not the island, from the beach on the island. I guess you couldn't really run off the island, technically.
Yeah. Well, no, there was one guy that just started walking straight off the island into the water. He was like, I'm out of here.
And he made it to Japan.
He made it to Japan, and they were
I
like,
was wondering how many people were like trying to get the next flight out as fast as they could.
no, if you're there, go to the North Shore. That's the best thing to do.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Drive as far north
like
as
they
you
say
could.
to take cover, but really, I wouldn't stay in Honolulu or Pearl Harbor. Like that's where they were targeting.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the point was, they called me, and my entire family told me they were all about to die.
Yeah,
They
and my
said-
husband runs out crying. I mean, like,
Me.
I don't, Josh is crying because, I mean, you don't usually see your husband, like, bawling. And he's
Well, I
like,
wasn't bawling. I was like, what's going on?
He was bawling. It's okay.
Yeah,
Your family was going to die.
Anyway, I don't cry.
You can own
dare
that,
you.
Josh. Own your tears.
There was
you would have been
there was
sad.
one tear. There was one tear. But no, I was freaked out,
he was
definitely,
frightened.
because my entire family told me they were about to die.
It's terrifying.
And you gotta assume there's 1 million people on that island. 1 million people all thought they were about to die.
Yeah,
that
what
day.
would you do with your life if, like, that you have literally 10, 20 minutes left? Because I heard it's like 20 minutes once a nuclear bomb goes across. 20
Yeah,
minutes.
that's what they said. It takes about 20 minutes to get from North Korea for an intercontinental blah 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 missile.
What would you do with your last 20 minutes, Megan?
Go! My mind goes to like Buffy the Vampire Slayer and all the themes of how everyone would go crazy and have sex in the last few minutes of their lives. That was the big theme in Buffy. During the apocalypse, everybody breaks down to have sex.
Yeah.
I
Well,
don't
that's
know.
teenagers, so
Well,
that's really
all
what
you
they
have to
do.
for 20
That's what
minutes,
they generally
right?
do most days.
I don't know.
mean,
I guess I'd probably do the same as what your family did. I'd probably call my family and say my
love you.
goodbyes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they said, "I love you."
That's
and-
what I told him. I said, tell them you love them. Like, it could have been his last
Yeah.
chance. It was really
You're right.
scary.
I did. I told them I loved them. And then I looked up online and I found out that it was a fake. So
And
that
then he was
lasted
like,
about,
you're okay,
for
you're
me,
gonna
the
live.
crisis lasted 5 minutes. For them, it was a whole 40 minutes because it wasn't,
Because it took them
it took
a while.
38 minutes for the state of Hawaii to realize they had made the mistake and actually post it on the emergency alert system again. So actually, like within 10 minutes, the Honolulu Police Department, they had contacted them and found out that it was a fake, and they were going up and down Honolulu on Waikiki Beach, where all the tourists are, with megaphones saying, "You're not gonna die." Don't worry, there's not a missile coming. Because everybody's freaking out, and they're all tourists, so they don't...
But not everybody speaks English, too. Think of all the ones
Right.
that still could. They're like,
Onagashi
what are they
mas.
saying? Oh, my God, we need to get to the police.
Oh, yeah,
There are
I
a lot
gotta-
of
Right.
A lot of,
Well, I'm assuming
foreign
the emergency
tourists,
alert
too.
comes in English, even on a foreign cell phone. So if they only speak Japanese, they're like, I don't know what that is.
Well, I'm presenting at a trauma conference in Hawaii in April, and
Oh,
that was one of
cool.
the things one of the first things that I thought about was, oh my gosh, I'm presenting with some of my coworkers or my colleagues on trauma informed care, and I just feel like we're gonna have to figure out how to work that in because obviously, I mean, I think we're gonna have a lot of people who are pretty traumatized by that experience.
They're still getting over it, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Because you face death.
if you ever face your own death or somebody who's close to you, you definitely go through that existential crisis where you're like, well, like, what have I done with my life?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
like-
I'm like, am I happy with the choices I've made up into this point?
Did I really spend that much time farming invisible crops in Facebook?
To be fair, though, my first thought when the thing happened was, what did Trump do today? Then it went away.
It went away. It
was
has nothing to do with
fine.
him.
It has nothing to do with it, but just... Anyhow, it was a crazy time.
It was a crazy time, but I got to talk to my family. I hadn't talked to them in a couple weeks, so that was nice.
How are they doing now?
Oh, they're fine. They're all still a little bit, shook up by it. And now they're wondering when the next one's going to come, But I told them,
a little on edge.
I told them, next time they call me and tell me that they're about to die in a horrible holocaust of nuclear war, they need to make sure it's real because I don't want to get that call again.
No, you know that you don't, like, if it doesn't say it's a drill, they're
right.
going to call you. You
No.
got to act like it's real.
No,
You don't
I know.
well, wait, Josh said we needed to make
But that's the thing. The emergency alert system cried wolf to an entire state of people. So if it happens next week and it's real, nobody's going to believe them.
See,
Right.
one thing we came up with afterwards that was really silly is, you remember that old paperclip guy on, like, the Word
Clippy.
documents, Clippy? And
Yeah.
so,
Oh,
like,
yeah.
I think that they should have that for the emergency alert system, where he kind of, like, bounces up when you accidentally push that
Like,
button.
Are you writing about a nuclear threat?
Are you
Are you sure?
Do you really want to click send?
Because then there's just this, I feel like there should be, like, a second, that's
second
pretty
button.
serious.
And how
'Cause
did
somebody
it take
hit-
38 minutes for someone to notice that it was not accurate?
Well, they noticed within the first few minutes. Like, it was like 6 minutes. They knew because people were calling.
Yeah, because
of
people
course.
are freaking
They're
out. Yeah, they're
So
like,
they
what
knew,
happened?
but it took them another 32 minutes to do the emergency
Apparently,
alert.
it's harder to redact an alert than it is
Well,
to
no, it's
put
just
one
you're
out.
putting another alert out. I think
Yeah.
it's just they said there was a shift change actually happening.
Oh.
Right.
That's
So
why you need the Clippy
literally,
guy.
Oh my
literally, they hit a button and everybody left their desks.
They were like, oh, we're
and they're like,
busy,
"Hey,
we're on
let's go
break."
have some coffee
Were
and
all their
chat."
phones giving them the alert that they need to
Maybe
take
they're not
cover?
allowed to have their phones. Who knows?
I'm sure their phones went off. Yeah,
No, it's
I'm sure they
terrifying.
knew, but I think they were more like kind of reeling, like, "What do we do?"
You're like, uh-oh. Oh, yeah, you go into shock first when you make a
Yeah.
mistake.
I don't know. It sounds like they need to.
It's
Like,
not one you can just take back.
yeah, they might need to clean house a little there.
I hope somebody wouldn't get fired for that. I mean,
No.
it was a total mistake. I think that,
Right.
that like a Clippy or something along those lines,
Right.
it's more that they should
Yeah,
probably
they should have
second.
a Clippy.
They
They
just
should
need
have
to
They should have an "Are you sure?" button.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Did you mean to send a missile crisis
Exactly.
launch, or is this just a mistake?
Okay, that's
All
enough
right,
on
we'll move
Honolulu.
on. I think, but
But
we should.
my
mention-
family's all alive. That's the good news.
Yeah, family's alive and
Nobody's
well.
dead.
Well, and you said you were going to Hawaii, so I mean, are you open to talking about what you're doing out there?
Yeah, sure. So I'm on the board of directors of the National Partnership for Ending Interpersonal Violence, and I've been working with a group of other people who we've been working on guidelines on trauma-informed care and trying to educate the public about trauma-informed care and how to respond to it. So, like I said, that's kind of how I sort of see the link between what you're already talking about is, how do we carry that message on to the public so that they can understand and apply different principles to best help people figure out how they can help one another in a kind way.
Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about what trauma-informed care is?
Yeah, what is that?
Because the people listening are like, what's that mean? I'm aware people are traumatized, but what is trauma-informed care?
Yeah.
What trauma-informed care is this idea of being able to look at someone through a lens that is kind of different from your own. So if you're taking a trauma-informed care perspective, you're understanding that there are a lot of things that could potentially impact how people are responding. So if you see someone who, is angry or agitated. Maybe you see a girl who's gotten into fight at school, and she suddenly lashed out at the security officer, and then
people just assume, oh, it's just a bad kid, or it's somebody who's just
that would not be
acting out.
trauma informed. They'd be like, oh, they just need to be punished or something.
No, the reality is that behavior is formed through trauma sometimes.
They usually have, it's thinking about what are the other things that are impacting that person. So how do our policies, how do our principles impact the way we are treating other people?
Right.
So you might think that the best thing is to put your hands on that girl and stop her and tell her no, but there could be a lot of things that she's carrying with her from her family, from her background, that are causing her to respond the way she is in that exact moment. So if you're thinking about trauma-informed care, what you're probably going to do is you're going to not go to, there's something wrong with you, you're bad. We're going to go to, what has created this situation? Why is it that this person is responding that way? And what are some other things that we can best do? So we look at our policies that a lot of people have in place. So instead of it being like a top-down hierarchical sort of process, we're going to be looking at it as sort of an interaction, and maybe this set of rules might not be the best thing to help somebody out in a given situation. So like if you're in the doctor's office and they always make you take off your clothes and get in the gowns, somebody who has a sexual trauma history might find that really upsetting,
triggering, maybe.
It might. In some, sometimes it's unnecessary. Why do we, if you're just gonna look at my back, why do I have to take off all my clothes?
Yeah.
Why am I getting naked in the doctor?
Do you get naked every time?
Oh yeah, just as a precautionary measure.
I do the same thing at the dentist.
What dentist are you seeing? I want to see this dentist. No, I'm just kidding.
No, I haven't been to the dentist in years.
No, I know. I keep telling him he needs to go to the dentist, and he's like, whatever. They're just going to show me I have cavities. And I'm like, that might be a reason to go to the dentist. It's been 8 years.
That's actually a perfect example. So, like with trauma-informed care, the assumption generally is that people just might be uncomfortable with going to the dentist because they don't like pain.
Right.
But from a trauma-informed care perspective, we understand that some people have sexual trauma histories that make it so that the dentist could be very, very triggering. You have somebody who is close to you, who's kind of laying on top of you,
standing above
putting
you,
a drill in your face,
and even
shoving things into your mouth,
into your mouth,
even not being able
have
to
an oral sex.
Now that you talk about it, that's kind of graphic.
Oh my god!
Yeah. Don't go to the dentist, people.
No,
I think that's the
we're
most
not
important
saying
thing we
that.
can take away from this.
Trauma-informed care just means be conscious of that and maybe make adjustments to help that person.
Right.
Go to the dentist, not just avoid everything. Because, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but one of the challenges for people who are struggling with trauma is that is the tendency is to just avoid, but that doesn't help altogether. There are quite a few things in life we still need to learn to work through. Here's a really small example. So like somebody has a phobia of a spider. You don't want somebody to get to a point where they're literally avoiding walking outside because they're afraid of spiders.
Exactly.
Maybe just avoiding nests of spiders is okay.
Sure, maybe you don't have to walk out in the woods, but the point is you need to be able to walk out of your house. You need to be able to go down the street. You need to be able to see a dentist. It's how can we adjust so that that's still a possibility, not avoid everything that could possibly be
You're never
going
to get over your fear of spiders if you never get near a spider.
Yeah.
Somewhere in my head I went not to a good joke, so I'll move along.
Me too.
You did too.
All right. Yeah, I'm not going
to
say it.
We both did because we're trying to be sensitive. I love that.
I'm going to go ahead and say it.
What is
You'll
it?
never get over your fear of rapists until you're around rapists.
I wasn't going to go there. I was going to say you'll never get over your fear of penises until you get near a penis.
The reality is that's actually true. You don't want to be around rapists, but you have to be able to talk about your trauma, I think. For a lot of people.
It's totally healthy to not want to be around your rapist.
Sure.
That would be very adaptive.
Yes.
But the other things that are associated with your trauma, so being able to leave the house, maybe it happened in your bedroom, being able to be comfortable around that, or even a fear of maybe if your perpetrator was a male, a fear of males. 50% of the population is males, so it's not adaptive to go your entire life with avoiding every kind of every situation situation where there is a male involved.
Yeah, there's a lot of them.
Well, and I can go a step beyond because I do work with trauma in terms of sex and how people reintroduce sex into their life. But usually after, so just like to give kind of people a perspective on this, usually people will do some sort of trauma treatment before they do trauma sex therapy because the trauma treatment itself is creating that situation where you're trying
where they feel safe enough to even address that.
Yes, where you feel safe enough, you feel like a trigger is not going to stop your life entirely, but it's still a part of your life, but you're working through it and you can still do things adaptively in your life. But then sex therapy takes a step beyond, and it's how do we reintroduce a positive sex life with all of those triggers that could still be involved? Because like I was talking about with the penis, for example, if a penis was involved in your trauma, then if you want to be in a relationship with a man, then that may involve who has a penis. That would involve potentially having that penis around you, trying to be sexual and in a positive way and not basically boxing off your entire sex life because, well, you're afraid of that penis, to be fair.
And it's a really difficult thing to get to in the therapy process. I mean, I like what you're saying about, saving it for last, because that's kind of
do.
In terms of the healing process, we've got so much work that we need to do up front, but, with psychoeducation and coping and being able to talk about it before we can even, honestly, for many people, being able to have sex with a partner or even date, that can take a very long time for people to get to the end part of the treatment process because it requires a lot more regulation skills before then.
Yeah, a lot more safety. And I think I wanted to put that out there too, because I've had clients who maybe started the sex therapy process before they were ready. And I think they maybe felt a little bit like failures when they started and they were like, I'm not ready to touch this. Yeah. So like, it's totally normal if you're not ready to start sex therapy with your trauma, because I mean, if you like you're saying, Megan, if you haven't even gotten to a point where you can regulate through a regular trigger, then, I don't know how you can introduce sex. It doesn't mean it's not possible. I've actually worked with quite a few people who have felt re-empowered or with their sexuality by reintroducing it in a very consensual way.
Conversely, I will have people who the reason that brings them in the first place is that they are having problems with their relationships or they're having problems with their sex life. So then they decide to, it's been 20 years since their trauma, but now they decided that this is the impetus for change for them. This is what motivates them to come in. But the reality is, the actual part where we're getting to work with their what we call in PTSD land avoidance symptoms. That's avoidance is not a judgmental word, even though it might sound like it. But
no, that's what they do.
It's adaptive.
You try to avoid things that cause pain.
Yeah, and it's clinically, it's actually a word that's one of the subcategories of PTSD. So it is a normal response when people are struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder.
Protective.
Adaptive, absolutely. Yeah.
So how do people get over that? Avoidance.
Avoidance. Well, you already said it earlier. You never get over your fear of spiders if you never get near the spiders.
Right.
So,
or penises.
Or dentists.
So it's a matter of. I will say this: there is different perspectives depending on which modality of trauma treatment you're using. But in general, what we find is you need to be able to gradually be exposed to elements of it. So thinking about it peripherally, which is the psychoeducation about trauma. So talking about myths and facts. So many people have really bad ideas in their head about what sexual abuse and sexual trauma really is. So what we want to do is...
Well, I don't think anybody has good thoughts about sexual trauma.
Well, maybe you should go there. What's a bad versus a good?
I don't know what that means. Yeah.
Well, so the idea that it's my fault. I was asking for it. It was what I was wearing, or asking, why were you there? I shouldn't have gone to that place.
Basically, anything that's victim blaming
or
self-blaming.
Yes, or that people lie about rape. They make false reports. When in actuality, it's somewhere between 2% and 8% that actually make false reports. It's not everybody. It's a minority.
It's more commonly
true. It's a minority of cases.
But it does happen, and that sucks.
And it's the equivalent of any other, and those false report rates are the equivalent of what you will see with any other crime.
Yeah. And I want to throw it out here too. So let's define this somewhat. Non-consent is a big part of assault, rape, and trauma. the difference between sex that is, like, so a lot of sexual things, like people like to have sex, and
Do they?
sorry, I'm trying to put this
people
out
like
in a nice
sex?
way, but I'm tripping up on the words.
Just say it.
Non-consent is the issue. So like all of those things are people blaming themselves for somebody non-consensually acting upon them, and that's where people need to have a very clear understanding. If you have not consented to an act, I don't care what the act is, that is a trauma, that is an assault, that is where we need to define this, and we need to stop victim blaming, because
Right.
that is where we say, well, those things, those context things that they're talking about, well, you shouldn't have been at the party, or you shouldn't have drank that much, or you shouldn't have done those things. Well, you shouldn't have done something without my consent, is
Yeah.
what we need to be saying.
Right.
The other part of it is a lot of times people confuse consent and assent, so they think that
What's
that
Let's talk about that.
What's consent and essence?
and an assent. So the idea, sometimes people will think that, like, say if you have a teenager, she consented to sex. She consented with that sex to having, to doing this with that teacher or whatever. She wanted it. She pursued it. Well, you can give consent, which is saying yes, but that doesn't mean that you are capable of giving assent.
Right.
So,
Right in the
or,
state of
sorry,
Missouri, it's
the
like,
other way
I
around.
think it's 17 or
Yeah.
14 if it's with another minor for the
Yeah.
age of consent.
Yeah, so I mean, or you can get, I should have, let me correct myself. You can give assent, but that doesn't mean you're actually
Right.
giving consent.
Sometimes you're not legally
so
able to, because you're a
saying,
kid.
Yes,
Yeah.
you're not.
You're
If,
12, you're 10,
if you're
whatever.
a child, if you have a mental handicap, if you are disabled, if you are under the influence of drugs or
Prisoners
alcohol.
and prison guards. Prisoners can't consent to prison guards. I want to point out one sexual ethic that I teach a lot of people, which is that healthy sex is non-exploitive. Is it exploitive or exploitative? Non-exploitative. And what that means is it can't be in a one-down relationship. That's why doctors aren't supposed to have sex with their patients. That's why prisoners are not allowed to have sex with
Or
prison
therapists.
guards.
Yeah,
And that's why adults are not allowed to have sex with children, because that is a one-down relationship, and there are power dynamics at play that can cause harm to the safety of the person in the down position.
Absolutely.
Does that make sense?
Same goes with therapists. So, that's
Right.
one of the
Yep.
one of the biggest ethics
kind of a
complaint
big
for
deal.
therapists is
Stop having sex
is
with your
having
clients.
sex with clients, and that
terrible.
and which
Does that happen often?
I
that's
don't know.
the biggest number one ethics complaint against therapists.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Interesting. So therapists,
Terrible.
stop having sex with your clients.
Yeah,
That is one of our ethical codes, but I don't think there's a legal statute that goes along with it. I'm not sure, though.
Either way, you can lose your license at the
well,
least
when
You
we
can.
for something like that.
just in terms of how we define sexual abuse, it's whenever someone is bigger, stronger, older, or
More dominant in some
or
way,
has more
controlling.
in a position of power or
Yeah.
authority, and uses that for sexual exploitation reasons to take advantage of someone else for the purpose of having sex. That is what sexual abuse is.
Right.
Exactly. And so that's why, as a therapist, we're telling you what to do with your life. We're helping you make decisions. Yes, you're paying us for that service, but you're not paying us to also try to manipulate that to get something for ourselves.
Absolutely.
You
Well, and
shouldn't
that's that was big. Harvey Weinstein's big downfall right there. Is he was in this people in Hollywood. They're in such a position of power and authority. They exploited that.
Right.
They used
Is that part of
against
the
other
Me
people.
Too stuff?
Yeah,
Okay,
actually,
so
she's very
we
interested in
should-
talking about this.
You want to talk about that a little bit? Like, so the Me Too thing, explain it to us a little bit. Like,
So hashtag Me Too was started. Actually, it originated with Tarana Burke, and then it was popularized by Alyssa Milano on, I think it was Twitter, where in response to hearing about, I can't remember which celebrity it started off with.
Cosby or Bill
No.
Cosby?
I don't know. I think
Louis
he
C.K.
long ago did, but then there was Louis C.K., there was Weinstein, there were quite a few.
Yeah.
Now I'm hearing
So
even
it
like
just
Ben
kept-
Affleck.
In
and,
response
like,
to one main case, then she started. She
Right.
she put out hashtag. She had this very nice sentence about if for anyone who has experienced sexual abuse or sexual assault or sexual harassment to speak out about it, and or just to put hashtag Me Too, and
wow.
it just spread like wildfire through
Right.
through Twitter and Facebook
The
and
the
everywhere.
percentage is so high of women
Yeah, I
that
didn't
have
realize
been
how
assaulted,
common it
not
was.
just in that situation, but just in general. I mean, do you have some of that, like the research on how many women are either being assaulted or reporting all that stuff?
Yeah, so it's about statistically it's around 30%. So it's around 30 to you see a range with different research. It's 1 out of 3 to 4 women in their lifetime, and 1 in 6 men.
Okay.
So before the age of 18, at least for the men. So it's it's a very common thing. It doesn't happen to everybody, but it happens to a significant minority of people. And of those, only about 30% ever report, 30 to 40% ever report what happened to them to the police.
Right.
We had an episode a while back where we had a lawyer talk about this. It was Rachna Goyal, and she was talking. She does the Jane Doe Advocacy Center. I don't know if you're aware of them, but she said that part of the reason is that people don't know, like they don't know how to report. So there's the taboo and the victim blaming that happens, but then secondarily, like, what do you do? Who do you report to? Do you go to the police? What are the next steps? How do I really get justice for this? And it's not clear in our
it's
system.
terrifying. It's a terrifying situation. Most people they don't really understand that. How the legal system views something is totally different from the victim's perspective, which when someone has been through a trauma, they're not thinking clearly. They're not thinking logically. All those stress hormones, it takes the stress hormones that circulate through your body at that time that, shut down all the non-essential functions in your body, which are, so like your frontal lobe that allows you to think about thinking and you think more complex things. That part of the brain is totally shut down.
Oh, it just goes out the window.
Oh, no. So
you just go into survival mode, right?
Absolutely. You just go into survival mode. So those things around, heart, respiration, breathing, those are the main things that are going at that moment. And it takes, sometimes 24 to 48 hours for those stress hormones to dissipate out of the body.
Yeah.
So even after something has happened, it takes a while for them to think about it. And what most people... the thing that most people don't get is the first thing that they want to do after they've been sexually traumatized is they want to go home. They don't want to go to the police. They don't want more people touching them.
No.
And what they want to do is they want
to get away.
They want to go. They want to feel safe, and safety is usually for many people is equated with home. So you just want to be home.
Yeah.
And so and maybe they're taking a shower when they go home too, or something like that. But it takes a lot of times with the people who I see, most of the time they don't usually choose to report on their own unless they are encouraged to by a friend or a family member, or they have significant injuries that make it such that they need to do it.
To go to the hospital or something.
Yeah, but people have really good reasons to not report.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to think about it from, like, if it's a kid's perspective or even adult. But, like, you have to report, you have to, one, talk to the police, which that's intimidating for anybody.
Oh, yeah. And a lot of people don't get treated really well by some of the officers.
I was wondering, like, to what degree are police officers trauma informed? I think that would be a great training for them.
I think a lot of police officers are trained more in trauma today than they were 30, 40
Probably
years ago.
30, 40 years ago, but I don't know to what degree.
There's one police, I think, is it the Fetty technique? I think I'm blanking on the name of it, but he really talks about a trauma-informed care perspective with police interviewing, and he trains police across the country, and it's phenomenal.
And they want a lot of them to actually have psychology backgrounds.
And
like we had a nephew who was trying to go into the police, and they said, get a degree in psychology or computer science. That's what they want to do.
Those two things.
Well, and since I work as a crisis counselor with BHR as well, we do some of our outreaches when we go out into the community. We collaborate with some of the CIT officers, and those CIT officers are police officers who are trained in crisis intervention and mental health, and they are phenomenal. I've worked with some amazing police officers, but I know, as much as I know that many can be fantastic, I also know that there are some that are
not as fantastic.
Not as fantastic.
No, I had one. I've heard stories about people who are like, they've been asked, so do you really want to ruin this boy's life? You really want to think about
that
what
is
you're
the worst
doing,
thing to say to
and
a victim.
have physically taken their evidence collection bags back, and in response, so some of the people have been really upset by what happened, and the police officers have actually physically given their evidence collection bags back, the rape kit and things like that, so that it doesn't get entered into get into the system. But after they've intimidated them, from filing reports, I mean, there could be some.
That's pretty bad.
That's terrible.
It's pretty. There
like,
have been.
Why
bad
would you ever want to?
experiences.
And then even beyond that, so like, take it a step, they have reported it, then even to prosecute, some of them have to face their...
They have to testify.
They have to testify against their
Well, and that's even
rapist.
That's even far down the
That's
road.
far down the
That's
line,
further
but-
down the
So
road if you
first
even
off-
get there.
So, so the first barrier is whether or not they're, feel like it's worth it to report it. Do they even want to report? Are they able to? Are they fearing retaliation? Do they not feel like what happened to them was really rape? Do they not see it as a trauma? And a lot of people, they don't. It takes them a while to come to that conclusion.
Yeah.
But then once they file a police report, or once they contact someone, then it goes to filing the police report, which, they have challenges with how the officers may or may not respond. And then, in the hospital, again, that could be, there's a potential for re-victimization there at the hospital if they're going to the hospital. Although it's important for people to know that they don't have to do that. So there's certainly a choice. You can go to the hospital, but that doesn't mean you have to file a police report if you're an adult.
Okay.
They have that choice. But then, and even if they go through that process, then to go to the prosecutor, that case would move to the prosecutor's desk, and it's up to the prosecutor's discretion on whether or not they are actually moving forward and pressing
Right.
charges.
Whether they have enough evidence to do it. Or,
Right.
Yeah.
Which is that's why it's so low. It's so hard to go through this. The process is convoluted, and if in any step of the way you kind of feel pushed down or not supported, each of those times, it's hard enough to talk and tell people. Like even before going to a police officer, I've had clients tell me, the worst thing was when they told their mom or their sister or like a family, somebody, and they denied it. They were like,
absolutely.
Like if at any point somebody says this is all in your head or you're being crazy, then that can shut a person down.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The number one predictor of how people do in the long run after trauma is their level of social support.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that
when
makes sense.
when I do the assessment with people, when they first come in to see me, I'm often asking them, so who did you first tell, and how did they respond when you told? And a lot of times that is highly predictive of how they responded later on. So if the person they told was supportive and believed them, then their healing process probably works a lot faster than someone
As it begins there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's otherwise it
sense.
takes so much time for us to untangle all of those, what we call cognitive distortions, or just unhealthy beliefs that are so problematic for people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is the part in the show where I shut down because
It's
the
hard
whole
to talk
topic
about
hurts my
trauma.
feelings.
I know.
and I
I'm
take
sorry.
on
I'm like
people's
bumming
emotions.
everybody out, but
No, this is important
No.
information because
It's
we
when
want
you're-
people.
It's hard to
be
think of
helped.
it from the victim's perspective.
Yeah.
Right.
Because you empathize with them.
Right.
You can understand that feeling of vulnerability, of feeling isolated by something somebody else did to you.
Yeah.
Right. Well,
And then you feel isolated to the whole world because people are telling you you're crazy, or, oh no, you're just making shit up,
Yeah. Well, and that's I'm one of those people who actually reads the comments on the YouTube and
Oh,
Facebook
no.
articles.
Oh, wow, good for you, I guess.
You read the sewage on YouTube.
You read the sewage. Well, those comments can be pretty
They
toxic.
are. They're so terrible. But
I've
it's
never seen a thread on YouTube that goes for more than 3 replies without it just being, no, you're wrong, no, you're wrong, no,
I
you're
know,
wrong.
It's so
Yeah.
ugly.
Yeah.
But I do that because I'd like to see all the different perspectives, and sometimes I'll even throw myself into the the psychoeducation mode.
You
of
throw
like,
yourself into the gutter.
I
You
can't
comment
well,
as
not
well?
in the
No,
gutter,
okay.
but I do when people are saying really things that are really victim blaming. I'm kind of like a mother cub. I'm fiercely protective of the people that I work with because I happen to work with the most amazing, wonderful, kind people. They are so resilient and they are such fighters. I admire them. It's a privilege to be able to work with the people who are gracious enough to share the stories of the worst things that have ever happened to them with me.
Yeah.
And it's an amazing experience to have in light of the tragedy. And so it's important for me to make sure that I am doing my due diligence and trying to protect them where I can from re-victimization. So sometimes I will jump in there and
You'll jump in.
I will
Ding, ding,
offer,
you're coming in.
I will offer some,
Gloves
some
are
words
off.
that kind of challenge those beliefs, and so when people are saying, well, why did she even go there in the first place?
Right.
And some with the hashtag Me Too stuff, I've had a lot of people asking me about my perspective on that, just because most of the time I think that's because they they want me to confirm their beliefs that they already have about, and sometimes I'm greatly disappointing them because I think it's a fantastic movement.
And I think it's important that people understand that, like, okay, I think sometimes this is ingrained in us. I think sometimes people don't realize to what degree that, like, those messages have been ingrained in them growing up, that, like, that victim blaming stance that people aren't aware of.
Why
and so,
do people do that?
I think, like, if you hear it in culture, you hear it from parents, or like people will say, well, why was she there? And it's been an interesting challenge to kind of, like, I even remember on one of these episodes, I was like, wait a second, Angela, what are you saying? And I pulled it back because there's just so much. It sounded like you were victim blaming,
I was like,
no, I'm not intending to victim blame, but it's like you hear it so much that it becomes this thing that you don't even think about anymore.
Right,
I think that's a piece of it.
Yeah, well, there's something called the just world hypothesis that, the idea is that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. So, like, people are forever talking about karma, like, that's the karma, whatever.
That's silly.
Well, what kind of karma? I'm just like, oh yeah, sorry, it happened because you deserve to be raped. What?
Sorry, child.
No.
And it's a bastardized version of karma because they've like watched too much My Name Is Earl, and so they think that if they do,
it's a great show, but
I do love the show.
Not very good on philosophy.
But that's not exactly. I mean, the
the trouble is
the Hindu
sometimes random
philosophy
stuff
of karma
happens.
is that anything that happens, if you're a really ugly person in this life, you might be reborn in the next life as a slug. It's
and
not
I think that sometimes
something bad is
happen.
going to immediately happen to you in this life.
Right. There's no cause and effect.
Yeah, sometimes bad things happen to good people.
Absolutely.
Sometimes good
All
things
the
happen to
time.
bad people. I don't think there's a lot of
Bad things just happen
connection.
to people.
No, but babies are born with cancer, and
They weren't bad people.
no,
Yeah,
they
what did
didn't
they
do
do?
anything. They didn't do anything wrong. They just came.
That's just life. Unfortunately.
And sometimes there are awesome people that just have the crappiest things happen to them, and sometimes there are people who are kind of,
terrible people.
terrible people. That become.
But let's be trauma informed and
They
assume
become
that they're a
millionaires.
terrible person that way because they themselves dealt with a lot of crap.
They might have.
And the reality is, most of the
That's
people I've
true,
met
too.
that come
There's
across
sometimes-
as terrible people, they generally dealt with a lot of this crap too.
Indeed.
They just didn't learn how to deal with it.
Yeah.
They
Yeah,
instead
that
directed
happens
everybody
too, where
around them.
sometimes people who've come from traumatic histories then act out. And, and going back to that trauma-informed place, I mean, how do we approach people from a trauma-informed perspective so that we can actually, like, rehabilitate? It kind of reminds me of, like, other countries. Josh, you can remind me of maybe what country does this, but one of the countries, the Norwegian countries or Scandinavian ones, doesn't have jails. They have,
I
saw
dorms.
that
movie about that.
Do you know what country this was?
Was it the Netherlands or
it
was
might
it
be
Sweden
the Netherlands or
or
Sweden, but like they don't imprison.
Well, I know
people.
in
They do more like dorms.
in Norway after
Yeah,
after that massive shooting on, was it Utoya, the island in Utoya, where I think it was something like 80 kids were massacred. How that now they're all the family is recovering, but they don't have a death penalty, and so the person who did that for pretty I don't know, of course they're unhealthy reasons, but it seems like I recall it had there were some I don't know, kind of racist underpinnings or something like that. But anyway, with him, he's people were really upset by seeing the fact that he's not at all regretful about what he did or had no remorse, but they believe in their form of rehabilitation has to do with treating people kindly, giving them a chance to rehabilitate into the society by they have these giant farms and things like that they'll have them work so they can find things to be proud of themselves in a different way. It's an interesting philosophy.
It is.
But when you go to the extreme of a child murder, it's hard to
kind of like
mass
hard
child
to
it's hard
kind
with
of
that,
fit
but
into it.
where I would see that being very helpful is in drug cases. A lot of times people end up in jail for drug. We have the highest percentage of people in jail in our country, are one of the highest percentages in the world of our population, and a lot of it is due to drug crimes. And I think that they almost end up worse going into jail than if we had rehabilitated and helped them to find something in their life. So I can see the pros and cons on either side. I mean, with that, like, God, what do you do? So anyhow, we've gone down a bunny
that's
trail.
bunny
Why don't you
trail
ask
there.
more questions? I know we do this all the time. Bunny trail,
So
Angela's
talking
bunny
about,
trail.
we were talking about the Me Too stuff.
Me too.
Yeah. Well, so going back to that idea of that just world stuff with the false beliefs, what ends up happening a lot of times is that people like to believe that they have a sense of control, that they have power over what happens. So if this happened to you, you must have been doing something wrong.
Right.
But in the reality,
Stuff just happens.
no, people
happen.
things happen all the time that you have no power, you have no control over.
A missile gets launched at the state of
think
Hawaii.
of that. Like,
Are you
going to
blame
Hawaii
my
are terrible
family?
people?
No, I'm not going to blame my family for calling me and
Right.
telling me they're all going to die.
Right.
It's like,
But
I was a
people-
little annoyed, but
But people like to think that they have that control, that they
Yeah.
when they
People-
really don't. But that's an
people
easy
don't want to
way.
feel powerless. Yeah.
It's an easy way for people to blame someone else for it and say, hey, you shouldn't have been drinking, you shouldn't have gone there, and it would never have happened.
Yeah.
And that's
victim
really it's
blaming,
just not.
It's a way of skirting personal responsibility at times.
Yeah.
That's what it sounds like.
Well, I think people have a hard time understanding that predators are really, really good at picking out who is most vulnerable in any situation. Every single one of us is vulnerable at some point in time in their lives, or in some point in time in the day. We all sleep, we're all distracted, we all eat. But predators are really good at picking out that time when someone is most vulnerable to take advantage of them.
Right.
So, for example, what you'll find a lot of times is, with a lot of trauma survivors, they're going to be feeling pretty badly about what happened. Maybe because, well, initially it might start off with you're grieving the loss of someone. Maybe you went through a breakup, something like that. Maybe you're already being abused at home, and then after that, then a predator might walk into a room and see you sort of quiet. They might see you more withdrawn, or maybe your boundaries have shifted because of some earlier trauma experience. So maybe you are much more likely to give hug to the stranger with that where it might not be such a good idea.
Right. Sometimes you're too trusting.
Yeah. So there's different.
Just not sure where to put the boundaries anymore. That's what I've seen with a lot of my clients. They're like, "What are boundaries?" Not that they're not there, but that they, the way I describe it is somebody is basically. I don't like to cuss, but I usually cuss in this part. So somebody's shit all over your boundaries.
Sure, shit's okay.
Well, I try to avoid it because I do want families to be able to listen. But this is just the way I put it.
That's kind of my philosophy in therapy. They hear me swearing all the time.
It makes us human.
I follow the Marshall Linehan part about being irreverent.
The radical acceptance part.
Absolutely, irreverence, use of humor. Sometimes you have to use humor to get through it all.
Yeah, well, and that's what it feels like. So somebody's just shit all over them, and now you're kind of like, well, where are they? And they're almost kind of redefining what boundaries are for themselves, and that's a really challenging process for people who are kind of working through it, or defining what is a boundary.
And that's the other thing is like a lot of these people. If you're a kid and you are sexually abused, this might be the first time you've ever actually talked to your parents about sex. That has to be intimidating.
Well, not to mention that it could be usually it's family members who are abusing.
Sure.
So.
But the reality is people never talk to their kids about sex. People never talk
Rarely.
about sex. This is actually the only place anybody ever talks to me about sex is on this podcast. People are so scared of sex that it puts it in the darkness. And that's what the Me Too campaign tried to do, is actually subvert that. It tries to put it out in the open. That's why it's such a good campaign. Because it's saying it's okay to talk about it. You can talk about this terrible thing that happened to you, and it's okay. You don't have to be ashamed. And that's what's good about this.
Yeah, and that
campaign.
totally takes that out of the dark, and that's a part you asked earlier about how do people work through this? Well, that's a big part of it, is using their voice too. The healing process it makes such a big difference when people no longer, we want to challenge that shame and guilt and self-blame. And what a lot of that originates from is secrecy. Secrecy and shame are like locked in together, and it is so toxic. So if we can help people use their voice, talk about it, and know that what happened, especially if we can get people to support them around it, it makes such a difference.
Well, and I think that comes from sex being a casual conversation in general. One of the biggest purposes of this podcast for me is that I want sex to be a casual conversation in the home, so that things like that are even more taboo can be open and discussed.
It's easier to bring them up.
Right.
Yeah, if
I
you can
love
talk
that
about
you do
sex.
That.
That's the whole point.
Yeah.
The whole point, yeah.
If you can talk about sex, then maybe you can talk and advocate for
About
yourself
abuse.
when you're covering abuse.
Yeah. And being able to talk to your kids about sex and people in general also means you can teach them how to have those boundaries you were talking about.
Yeah.
Because
Right.
as a kid, I don't know any boundaries.
Like, what's a boundary?
What is this boundary? Do you mean like
Do you mean the
curb?
fence?
Oh, yeah. I have clients that tell me all the time that no one ever talked to them about sex. They didn't, their period was like a complete surprise when
Oh,
it
wow.
first happened. They had
They had
just
a Carrie
absolutely
moment?
no sense. I mean, some of them people have, some people have really, they have, precocious puberty where sometimes the onset is like when they're 6, 7 years old.
Oh no!
And
Wow,
so,
that's
you
young.
can imagine how horrifying that would be for a child to
For 7-year-olds,
to have-
all of a sudden have their period,
Yeah,
and not have no idea.
not
probably
have
think they're
any
dying.
idea.
Well, yeah, it would be like on
Absolutely.
Carrie, where she was bleeding in
scared
the
to
shower,
death.
and all the people were
Yeah.
throwing tampons
Oh.
at her, and then
was
of course
a-
she used
that
her
was
psychic power to
traumatizing.
kill them all.
Yeah,
So I'm sure
so
at
that's how it's
6
going to end up.
At 6, your psychic
They're all gonna
powers aren't
laugh
as
at you.
developed, maybe.
And that's how everybody had their first period.
I tell you, my
my
first.
God.
Sometimes
was,
the experience definitely is horrifying for
Yeah,
people.
I'm sure it can be.
This is why we need to talk. It's like, no, you're on your period. Everybody
Yeah.
has them. Here's a bed. Take care of yourself.
Yeah, no, I because I'd been so ingrained in the trauma world for so long. When I pulled my nephew aside. I don't know what grade he was in. He must have been maybe end of elementary, beginning of middle school, and I was like, we're gonna have the talk, and I just like did a brain dump of everything I knew about sex, and and helping
you need to know these things.
Yeah, and boundaries and privacy part rules and all that kind of stuff. I like went through that with him, and and years later he was telling me about how like all his friends are all coming up to him because they
They
know
knew nothing.
because they know he knows all this stuff and someone's actually given him the information. So his friends are all coming to him for the information
Right.
now,
And
it
that's
just
how
made me laugh.
That's
that's
the
how I
problem.
learned about sex
You're
as
either
a
learning
kid.
from your friends or porn.
It was
Those
my
are the two
friends or
most
porn,
common ones.
and it was mostly my friends when I was a kid. And it was the reality is I got a lot of misinformation.
Yeah.
I think
Oh,
a lot of
yeah.
young
This is
people
why
do
we need
because of that.
comprehensive sex
It's like
education.
he may not have misinformation he's spreading, but other kids do. You never know.
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
that's the point. Locker room talk is not great talk.
No.
Not often very serious or helpful
you can learn some, but you
information.
still
You can
need
learn
the
some.
comprehensive sex education, which
So you
our
can
schools
advocate
don't
for
seem to have
yourself.
it as much. Like I don't think it should be like one class you have
No,
in
it
seventh
should
grade.
be across
Oh.
the lifespan.
I think
Absolutely.
everybody should be knowing a little bit about sex at different ages. You're not going to tell a 4-year-old about everything.
Yeah,
but-
well, I mean, it's so normal for kids to have like crushes on teachers and things
Yeah,
like
sure.
that. And
Mm-hmm.
so when you see those cases in the news where someone has, where a teacher has abused a student, they're usually phrased as they had sex with a student and they wanted it and
Right, they don't use the
had
word rape.
No, they don't
they
use
take
the
it
word
out
rape or
as
abuse.
soon as it's a teacher. Generally, it's a female having sex with a male student. It doesn't get labeled as rape in the news or any
Sometimes both
conversation.
ways,
No,
actually.
both ways, yeah. I mean,
But yeah, absolutely. Because just because boys tend to, right? So like men sometimes have
Boys
their
tend to
boundaries.
want it more.
Oh yeah.
Well,
See, that sounds like
they're
victim
lucky.
blaming.
no,
They're
I
lucky,
don't.
that's what they
Well,
say.
I
I
don't
know.
want to say that. I'm saying that's part of
That's
why
the
that happens.
right. There's that
Right.
mindset.
Then there was this
Which-
idea that it's this person was older, they were cool, they're so this is they should feel honored for having that
You should be
experience.
honored.
You should be honored
It's
for
a
your
privilege.
But
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
honestly,
Oh my gosh.
the cases that I find the most difficult to treat are really the people who are sexually abused right around those teenage years where there was a grooming process that took place, and so they have such an entrenched belief about that. Even though their body was more developed, they might look older. They still have a brain that's only half cooked. Like if your brain doesn't develop until you're 25,
Yeah.
and you're sexually abused when you're 15 years old, you got a lot of years for that brain to finish cooking and developing and understanding things.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
even at
If-
that age, your body's not fully developed. They're babies. Like
I know.
when you're
see
15,
15-year-olds now,
when
you're like, you
15
guys are so little.
when you're 15, you look around at other 15-year-olds and you're like, we're adults. We look grown up. But now that I'm an adult, I look at them like those are kids.
Yeah.
Like they're babies.
babies.
They
But-
just see themselves as something else.
Sometimes they, like I said, with the precocious puberty, sometimes you do have people who really are.
They really look like
they've-
40-year-olds.
They fully develop their
Sure.
breasts and hips early on.
Sure.
Yeah, in high school, there was a guy who had salt and pepper hair already, and I was like, this man looks like he's 40, and he was a freshman.
This man.
He
He's a man.
He
That's
looked
tough.
older.
Oh yeah, there were all the guys who had the full beards at that age,
Yeah,
and
sometimes
women who
people
had
develop.
full hips developed.
Right.
Yeah,
But when
like
you
you
talk
were
about
6 foot tall.
Actually,
and
I looked
D's.
I can look back at videos when I was 12, and I was like, "Wow, I was a woman." I
She looked
totally
18.
looked like an
But you had
older
the brain
woman.
of a 12-year-old.
But I was young, and actually, I had a really. I can tell you a very silly story from my childhood. I was 11 at the time, and there was a 17-year-old boy trying to flirt with me and take me away to a barbecue. And I asked my husband, or not my
your
husband, my dad. Sorry, at the
Same
time.
thing,
That's
right?
right. No.
we need to go into
Yeah.
child marriage.
And to be fair, I did tell this boy that I was 17 at the time. So he's not a predator. He's just trying to date me, right? But so anyhow, I remember going up to my father and saying, "Hey, this guy wants me to go on a barbecue. Can I go?" And he goes, "How old is he, Angela?" And I was like, 17. And he goes, "And how old are you?" And I was like, 11. And he said, "Get in the car,
Get in the
Angela."
car.
Like that was it.
Do the
Right.
math.
And the point is that my dad understood that, and
was
he protected
protecting
me.
you.
And
Yeah.
throughout my childhood,
But
there were.
you were able to say something to
Yes.
someone where there was a likelihood of
Yeah,
them.
we had developed a relationship where
talk.
my dad was like, "Please talk to me about this stuff." And I can think of many moments in my
Where he was
childhood where
protecting you.
people, not
Yeah.
just my dad, my mother, and my sister, were protecting me from potentially stupid
Yeah,
mistakes.
because
Now looking back,
you're always been a wild card.
I've always been a wild woman, hence being a sex therapist now.
Yeah.
Wild card.
So we got to have somebody there to say, no, don't get hurt.
I needed a little bit of
Yeah.
guidance.
It means
Sure.
it means so
Everybody
much.
does at that
You know,
age.
we talk
That's
about
the point.
vulnerability. That's a huge
point.
checks and balance for that. When you have someone who is there to protect you,
Mm-hmm.
who is there to listen to you, who will believe you, who you actually can have a conversation
Yeah.
with, it makes such a difference in
Mm-hmm.
your ability to be safe.
Which, by the way, if you are talking to your kids about sex from a young age, then you suddenly become that person. That, if you just have honest, open, casual conversations with your children about
Sure.
sex on a regular basis, just saying, "Hey, this is okay. I want you to be able to talk to me about this." Then kids feel more comfortable coming to you at all times.
Yeah.
Hey, I did. That's
in
weird.
general.
I did talk to my dad about sex.
Right.
And it was the safe
Because
conversation.
it sounds like your dad made it so that there was a space for you to just talk to him, and it wasn't just get out of my way,
Yeah,
You're in my
just
way,
do what I
kid.
say, not what I do,
Right.
and
Right.
Right.
no, it was a different
Yeah.
world, and
Yeah.
so that's kind of what we need from parents and from teachers and counselors. Growing up, kids need access to people who can help them
Absolutely.
out. And
I'm a big sister with big brothers, big sisters,
Yeah.
and my little sister is, she's she's a junior in high school at this point in time, and she's
cool.
at that point now where she's interested in dating, and her mom is very much against her dating at this point.
so she's just going to do it behind her back because that's how
Yep.
people do it.
This is part of the convert.
That's part of the problem.
That's what all teenagers do. You can't forbid them.
You cannot prohibit anything. They will find a way to do it.
It's your
And that's-
natural human inclination. When
Right,
somebody
it's
tells
a
you
normal-
no, even when you're a baby, you are
I'll do
going
what I
to
want.
find a way to do it. Sorry,
Yeah,
continue.
it's a
I'm going to cut you
normal
off.
Oh yeah,
it's-
Olivia's that way right now. We're like, you're not allowed to go brush your teeth.
As soon
I'll
as-
do it. I want, Dad. I'm going to brush
You're
my
not
teeth.
my dad.
Yeah, that didn't work too well.
Well, and so she talks about how my sister wasn't allowed to date either, and then when she was allowed to date at 18, then she got pregnant right away. It's sort of like sometimes you find those situations where people go from having so many rules to no rules. How that can
They go wild. Yeah,
absolutely.
that's how girls go wild. We just
Oh,
figured it
girls
out.
gone wild.
Well,
Oh.
it's a cliche though
Silly.
of the woman who is raised in a
They call it
Catholic
Catholic girl
church
syndrome,
or another very conservative lifestyle,
whatever.
and then as soon as they're out in the world, they make their own decisions, and they kind of go a little overboard it sometimes because they don't know their own boundaries.
Yeah, it's good to
They-
have a safety net, where you can make mistakes, but you'll still have someone there to kind of pick
Guide
up the
you.
pieces a little
Yeah.
bit. We're all going to get our hearts broken, or hopefully people have the privileges of having their heart broken
I'd
so they
rather
can
not.
learn from it.
That's a cute way of looking at that. I guess it is a privilege. You learn a lot through the dating process about what you
absolutely.
want,
I
what you
hated
like,
that.
what you don't like.
I
that
hated
part.
dating so much.
Feels like rejection.
I like being
too.
married so much better. It's a lot easier.
Yeah,
I just get rejected on a daily basis.
You. Those were the days.
it is nice to have someone that you love and care about that you feel
Yeah.
safe with. But usually the first couple of people you date are a lot like they're like the first pancake, it's kind of mushy,
Yeah.
it's the one that didn't get fully
like a
cooked.
starter
It's not-
home.
It's
your first
It's not
home.
good. You want to toss that one out.
Some
You don't
things-
want to
realize
stick
the
that
roof
with
was
one that a lot of
completely
times-
shattered.
The roof is falling in. Shingles are falling off everywhere. There's some transient sleeping in the back.
Right.
you know.
A lot of times
there a
people
trans-
need to figure out what they really want, what they like, what they don't like, and it takes, it's a process.
Yeah, and it's a lot easier, I think, to do it if you can be open and be able to talk to your parents without them trying to give you punitive responses to that. And I think that's where a lot of people feel that shame around victim and sex because they're told that, oh, you're a deviant because you masturbate, or you're this or that because you have sexual feelings. Like, no, it's just... You got to be able to talk to your parents. It's silly.
And one area that you can learn the best about boundaries is in these relationships. And talking about sexual boundaries, that it's okay to actually just like play with kissing, but not go beyond that. That's a totally okay boundary that people can set in their relationships. Some people, when they're not talked about sex, have this belief. It's almost like a dichotomy that like you're either going all the way or you're not. Like there's no in between.
There's no in between at all.
And the reality is there's quite a
Interesting.
few ways that people can play around and enjoy sex and sexuality. And going back to consent.
You shouldn't be able to say no at any single point in the game.
Yeah, saying, you know what, I'm open to kissing, but I don't know if I'm open to going beyond that. And like even
You set
teaching
your own
people
boundaries.
to have the consent conversation
Right.
and deeply respect it.
The moment someone says no, the moment someone checks out. So if they're not
They can be
engaging in the
nonverbal.
process,
Well, yeah.
if they are not actively like seeming like they want to be there, if they're not connected to you, they're not engaging in that. Take that as a cue. So there's the no, there's the I don't knows,
There's the I want you to be comfortable with what we're doing, no
Yeah.
matter what we do.
Yeah.
I've had boyfriends like that, and they were great.
Hi.
You're my married
How
husband.
dare
I'm
you.
saying before
I'm great
you.
too.
You are great, but before you,
You knew nobody before me.
I was lucky to have men who did that, who were like,
Yeah.
what can we do to make this a good experience for
Oh,
you?
that's
And they
awesome.
cared. Like, and I like, first of all, date the Italians. They're great lovers, and Josh is
How
good
dare
too.
you. How dare you?
But I'm just saying, there were men. I did have men
You're
that
brave
were like
enough
that.
to talk about your past lovers in front of your husband.
I don't hear
he
about
doesn't
these
even wanna
Italians.
hear
What are
it.
you talking about? What is this Italian?
My first boyfriend, you knew about him, Josh.
No, I don't know what you're talking about.
I love you.
I love you.
That's
no,
trust.
he's a strong
That
man.
takes trust right there.
When you're talking about like setting those boundaries and stuff, while it's important also for the consent side, it's also important, I think, because if you're able to talk to your partner about this stuff, you can let them know what you do want. You can
Yeah.
say, "I want a kiss," and that's it.
kiss.
And then
I
they
want
won't
heavy
cross.
petting.
And then they know not to cross that boundary because if they do, you're gonna shut down. You're
Yeah.
not gonna be in it, and that's I
Well, and
think
that's
an
when
important
we're
part of intimacy.
Crossing into assault is when you're
Right.
doing
Right.
something past somebody's
Well,
boundary.
even just talking about intimacy, not
Yeah,
assault, but
yeah.
just being able to feel comfortable and be in the moment and be turned on. And if somebody
Yeah.
crosses one of your boundaries, you're not going to be turned on. You're going to shut down, and you are going to maybe take out consent.
Sort of. I mean, there's that myth too that people won't. That your body is only going to respond if you are. What was that quote that one politician said? The body just shuts that when if you're raped, the body just shuts that all down.
No.
Yeah.
No, that's not what I meant at
it's-
all.
I mean,
No.
what you have is a lot of times people the body is made to respond to touch. So if you are touched in certain ways, the body is going to respond physiologically.
Yeah.
So you will have both men and women who get physiologically aroused. Their body lubricates. They get
Right, but I'm talking
interaction.
mentally, though. Because you can have a disconnect between physical
Absolutely.
and mental
You can not,
stimulation.
up here, you might not want to do something at all, but that doesn't mean that your
That doesn't mean
body
your
is
body
not
doesn't respond.
Oh, yeah.
Which is why having that, being able to advocate for yourself in those moments, having conversations out of sex helps people to have conversations in sex. And when people have a conversation ahead of time and say, look, I'm really open to making out right now. And if you're both really just deeply respecting that, then it's okay, we're making out. And even if there was an attempt to go beyond, it's being able to say, hey, I want to make sure you're comfortable with this. I'm kind of getting into this, but like I don't want to push you beyond where you're comfortable.
Yeah.
Too,
I mean, the
'cause
reality
people
is,
do get into things.
if you're with your partner, you want them to be excited about being in the moment.
Absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
you would hope so.
You would hope so, and if not,
I've
hey,
heard my
get out of
fair
there.
share of stories that go in the opposite direction. But yeah, I mean, it feels it's when you have safety and when you have trust with the person that you're at, it's so much easier for a lot of women for them to let go and be part of that process. Their ability to have an orgasm. Like if they are feeling safe, it can make a big difference. Which isn't to say that people don't have orgasms during sexual assaults, because they absolutely do. But you can have other times where you have a trusting partner, maybe, but it's still hard for them to let go and allow someone else to have contact with their body and have access to their body, and feeling so vulnerable with like oral sex. That receiving oral sex can be an incredibly vulnerable situation for women.
Well, and what I've found for my couples and just people across is that the more there's respect for the boundaries and consent, the wilder sex can get, actually. Because if I can trust you with oral sex, I can trust you maybe with spanking. I can trust you with, I'm serious. Like, and that doesn't mean everybody. Later. It doesn't mean everybody's going to get to like maybe a wild space, because everybody has their own place. But I will say that, like, when I can respect you, or when I can trust that you, like, let's use spanking, that you're going to spank me, boundary. But you're going to keep that boundary. You're not going to hurt me too bad. You're going to listen if it goes too far. There's like a deep trust that's created that makes it easy to get kind of wild in the bedroom. So just throwing this out there, if you want to have great sex, learn how to advocate for your own boundaries and respect each other's boundaries and talk.
Spend some time beforehand figuring out what you and your partner, what kind of touch you actually like.
And make it a casual conversation. Safe. Like, just over when you're at the restaurant, say, so what do you like in bed? Like, tell me, talk.
I actually spoke
with
a radio DJ. That's one of his first conversations when dating. He's like, I just want to make sure we're on the same page about sex and what's okay and what's not okay. I'm like,
wait, that's on the first date?
On a first date. I don't know to what degree somebody wants it, but like,
it might be a little crossing those emotional boundary lines. That's kind of like the person who sends you the dick pic. That might be a little too soon.
Maybe on your second
and
date.
Maybe it's his way of screening the kind of person that he wants to be with, who is willing to talk about it on the first date.
Yeah, I don't know.
That's
the point.
Angela,
you still say, "Hey, I'm not ready for this conversation."
Angela is the kind of person who would talk about that on a first date.
About like that,
because I know her totally.
But that doesn't mean that if you say you're not ready for the conversation, I'm like, okay, totally.
Yeah.
Like that's the point. It's both a giving and a receiving when you're having these conversations, and you have to be very respectful when somebody puts a boundary. Okay.
Sounds good. So I want to turn the topic a little bit to some of the stuff you sent us, actually. You said that you have a reputation for getting sick and injured on your world travels.
Tell us more.
So tell us more. You had something happen in India.
Well, so first I'll connect that with, a lot of times people ask me, like, how do you do this trauma work? How do you do this trauma work for so long? Because it's so terrible to hear. I just don't understand how.
Yeah, I don't understand.
No, it's oftentimes people like, when I mention that, they ask me, hey, so what do you do? And I'll say, well, I'm a sexual trauma therapist. And then all of a sudden, like, the conversation shuts down.
Like, what
and the
do
person
we say?
Disappears. Right?
It's like, oh, look, there's a bird. I'm going to go over there.
It's like, okay, so I have a sense of maybe what might be happening here, but so
it's a hard topic, and people can be so polarized around it. I understand.
Even I have nerves about having just you on.
When we had our joke, we both were like, "What do we?"
Rape jokes, don't do it.
Yeah. Be careful.
Yeah.
You have to be careful.
Definitely that one. Yeah. I'm really big into advocating. I practice what I preach. So I'm huge on self-care. So in order for most people to overcome their traumas, self-care is an absolute essential part of that healing process. And because I'm at risk for vicarious trauma, and compassion fatigue from doing the work that I do, it's so important for me to keep my battery charged so that I have enough energy to be able to do what I do. I have my hands in a lot of pots, and
she's the same way.
I feel like people are like,
do a lot of self-care.
You do. So I feel like people have been telling me for years, they're like making bets on when I'm gonna like burn out,
when you're gonna crack.
It's terrible. But I love the work that I do, and I spend so much time with my self-care. And part of my self-care, it could be it could be something as simple as, getting a massage, taking a bath, listening to music, singing, dancing. I paint, I make jewelry, I reupholster. I love the most beautiful pictures I saw when I was coming in here.
Yeah, it's our favorite pastime.
I like the real colorful ones.
Yeah.
They're nice. And then travel. So I am big on traveling. So my partner and I, we travel all over the world. We've been to like a seventh of the world at this point in time.
Oh,
we got a few.
That's cool.
Or is it a seventh? seventh of the world, I think. So unfortunately, it becomes kind of a joke. So with my colleagues about, what disease did you come back with this time? so I had, let's see. So when I was in, I think I was scuba diving. When I was scuba diving I think it was the Bahamas. Yeah. I got too close to a coral reef, and then I got stung by some fire coral.
I didn't know they could sting.
Wow!
Oh, totally. Like my knee like swelled up like an elephant, and it took I guess some of the coral was like got lodged underneath the skin, and so it took like a year for my knee to totally heal.
Oh, really?
Wow.
I had when I was in India. When I was in India, I didn't know it but I was exposed to bed bugs.
Yeah, those are brutal.
By the time
I had those one time. Yeah.
Oh, totally. Well,
they're painful.
They apparently decided to make a nest in my clothes for the whole week that I was traveling through there, and I had my the whole backside of my legs and my back. I was covered with blistering welts.
And this only
that were
happens
exploding.
to you, not your partner.
No, it is just me. Like
you.
Like he was just like,
they're
I have this.
targeting you.
I was like, don't you have any bites on you? And he was like, well, I see like little pinpricks, and then here me, they're like these oozing, bursting sores, and I'm like going crazy as I'm sitting there in the Delhi airport, like, oh my god, I'm gonna die.
I hate. Oh, that sounds terrible.
Yeah, that's terrible.
Wow.
But if you travel enough, it's gonna happen. It sounds like you travel a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I got when I was in I think I got it when I was in Cambodia. I was so sick from whatever disease that I got. It was probably from putting a tiger's tail near my mouth, and I actually put my mouth on the tiger's tail.
Never bite a tiger. I've learned
that.
Well, yeah.
Never put a tiger in your mouth.
That's your PSA. Don't bite tigers. The more you know.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, I got super sick, and I was like hallucinating, and it was
wow.
We have like this nice before and after picture of my travels. Like before, I'm like look all happy and smiley, and then the second picture is like me with dark circles. My face is all gone. I lost like 15 pounds.
You would get travel trauma. Why am I doing this?
The bed bugs. I totally. It took me years. Took me years to be able to go to a hotel without like searching. Like I used to. I would search the bed bug registry for so what hotels have the bed bugs at it.
Okay, good to know.
And
we should do that. Make sure.
I would check all the seams in the beds and everything every time I got into any hotel, and super cautious about where I put my stuff, and just check bugs everywhere.
Yeah. Oh my
I'm better with that now, but it was pretty terrible at the time.
I can imagine. I'd be scared.
Yeah, bed bugs are not fun.
Oh. No.
Painful and annoying and itchy.
And St. Louis has such a problem with them now, too. I hear people coming in all the time with, there's just, unfortunately, they're quite rampant. And I happen to have, I guess apparently I'm allergic to them, to bed bug bites. So that was why they were turning into blistering sores for me. Yeah.
Intense.
So, it's, my travels are fun, but we never know what I'm going to get afterwards.
But you get a lot out of them.
Yeah, well, just when I was so you mentioned Hawaii. We were in Hawaii last year, and the tide pushed me into like a sea urchin, and I had those 12 those like 3-inch. I had like 12 3-inch quills in my thigh.
I stepped on one in Hawaii.
Oh, terrible!
Yeah,
it's tough.
I stepped on it, and then I actually fell because I was standing on the rocks at Sharks Cove. I
Beautiful
stepped
place
on
to go if you're
stepped
in
on
Oahu.
it, and then fell, and then slammed my arm into a coral, so I had a big gash on my arm.
Oh,
That was fun. I
you
still
should hang out
snorkeled.
with me. We should travel together.
I know, right? I still had fun though. I
we
kept
could show
going.
you some really cool
Like, I
places in Hawaii. That's where we used to live, so we know all the insider
Oh, yeah.
places.
Oh,
It
awesome.
did not
Wonderful.
break off inside me, the quills, though. Like, it just,
Oh,
I
it's
went on and then I
terrible.
pulled off and fell.
Oh, that's good.
My
I got a
favorite.
little
I had to
lucky than
like limp over limp over to the lifeguard and present my thigh.
Did
and,
he pee on you? No,
Help,
usually-
I'm
They actually
bleeding.
use vinegar. That's usually what's
No,
used
yeah.
to
Well, it's
start
not
to neutralize
jellyfish.
it.
Yeah, he kept asking me. He's like, "Are you sure you're okay?" He like, "Are you?" He like, some people are like, they go into shock and they're like, it's like, no, I got lots of flesh
Yeah.
on my thighs, so I'm
Yeah.
sure it's a protective factor for me.
Oh wow!
You just shake it off.
Like Taylor Swift, shake it off.
But I still love snorkeling. That's one of my favorite
No,
things
I
to
love
do.
it.
We're
It's-
actually going to Mexico.
We're going to Mexico
on
this
Friday.
Friday. Yeah,
Yeah.
Oh, are
we're
you?
excited.
Yeah, a little
we'll be in
self-care
Cancun.
for us.
Yeah, and travel is our self-care too.
Yeah.
That and massages and the painting.
Absolutely.
And that's the thing. So, I mean, for any of you out there that are like, what the heck is self-care? Self-care is something that replenishes you in some way. Anytime we're in a caregiver role, like being a therapist, a nurse, or a doctor, because some of them are listening, you are basically in a job where you're always giving to others. I call it the one-way relationship. And anytime you're in a one-way relationship, you're always giving, but you're not receiving back. And there's a lot that, like,
And
you
you're
get
hearing
out
a
of,
lot of traumatic stories.
well, and there's a lot that
You
you
empathize
get
with
out
them.
of like helping people, but it still is a one-way relationship, and that's
Mm-hmm.
how you kind of know the difference between like if it's a caregiver role versus if it's like
So what is
two-way.
self-care?
We're in a two-way relationship,
Sure.
so you can actually get something out of a two-way relationship, and
Mm-hmm.
that's why the self-care is so important. So all that self-care is something that gives back to you, like you said, recharges your batteries or replenishes you, and that's why like when you get a massage, so the massage therapist is one way giving to you,
Mm-hmm.
and like exercise can do it, or going on a travel, or getting into nature, running off into the hills like a caveman, all
good
of that
book.
stuff, reading a good book.
Absolutely.
These are all examples.
And that's part of what what trauma informed care is understanding that the people, it's not just the person who was originally victimized, but everybody who is around can potentially feel the impact from it. So by people who are your family members, your support system, you're in care, in people who are like in our profession and first responders, they are such at risk of being traumatized themselves
Yeah.
through what they're going through, that it's really important to think about debriefing. How are you spending time allowing room for that person to talk about their experience? Is it normalized? Is there a place for them? Are they
are
allowed
there
to take the
social
day?
supports?
Yes. Can they take a day off?
Oh,
Is it
yeah,
a mental
totally.
health day? Like just recognizing that people need time to take care of themselves and their body. Pay
So
attention to their
you're
body.
not supposed to work more than 50 hours a week. There is a science to it. Beyond 50 hours, you're
Oh, I
just
have not
hurting
heard
yourself.
That's
Seems out of
interesting.
nowhere, but yeah.
I just wanted to throw it out there because people are overworking, and like at 50 hours beyond it, you have higher risk for heart attacks. You have higher risk for, more being traumatized, compassion fatigue, breaking down, all of it. And so if you can just stop at 50 hours, then that gives you enough time outside of that for those other
To get
potential
that
self-care
self-care,
things.
Yeah.
So we're kind of at the end.
We are at the end of our show. It was really nice having you.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much for
Is there
coming.
anything you want to plug before we end?
Well, I think it's important for people to know that that if anyone has been through sexual trauma, that you can get in St. Louis, you can get free services at the YWCA Women's Resource Center. We have phenomenal
Is that
advocates
for men and women?
For men and for
That's
women.
Awesome. We
And-
like inclusivity.
Absolutely, they can work with the advocates in making the choice on whether or not they want to go to the hospital, whether or not they want to file a police report or get help through that process, and then they have therapists that will see them through that entire process as well.
What's the website or the contact info?
So you can contact, I think it's www.ywcastlouis.org, ywcastlouis.org. There are several other agencies in St. Louis that also do trauma-focused counseling, like Safe Connections and Center for Trauma Recovery. So there are lots of options for people, but the YWCA is one where it's free. We're big on empower. Our mission statement has to do with eliminating racism and empowering women. So we are people's biggest advocates. But we do, even though our name is the YWCA Women's Resource Center, we see see both men and women, and we have a domestic violence part of our agency as well to help.
That's awesome.
So we do lots of crisis intervention and BHR, behavioral health response. So when we do crisis intervention through behavioral health response, you can call. You have clinicians who are available 24 hours a day
for free.
For free, they will come out to your. We will come out to your home. We will meet you in the hospital.
That's awesome.
Anywhere, if you don't feel safe in talking to someone at your home, then we will we'll meet at McDonald's and talk to you and help get you connected with the resources that you need. So there are so many things that we can do to help someone out who needs the help. I'll also say there are other books if some of the things that people have heard us talk about today. There are books like Wendy Maltz's A Sexual Healing Journey. My former mentor, Ellen Ranney, has written a book called Unkind Gifts. And she talks about the healing process in there. And so I think there are a lot of resources. My website, if you're looking for more books and things like that, www.hopehealreflect.com has a bunch of trauma-related resources for people. If you want to know about books and movies, that's a good place to go.
Cool.
Okay, cool. And then, of course, if you want to see me as a therapist, it's www.therapistinstlouis.com. I have 2 things coming up. One, my book, Helping Couples Overcome Infidelity, comes out at the end of this month. And I'm doing an event associated with that called Let's Talk About Sex. It's at Foam on January 29th from 8 to 11. And it's going to be a big conversation. We have several speakers coming to talk about different areas in sexuality. And of course, I'm going to talk about sex because that's what I talk about. And then I'll also be signing and selling my book there at the event. So I hope you guys can come.
Yeah, and thank you for joining us. And as always, you can find us on Google Play or iTunes or anywhere else where podcasts are shot out into the void. And you can also find us at www.aboutsexpodcast.com. And if you go there, actually, I post a blog every week that goes with the podcast. And I try to be funny in there, but not always. But you never know.
He's pretty humorous. I think he does a good job.
Yeah, and if you want to check out the last one, we actually I wrote a little thing about the whole Honolulu thing. So you can hear more about nuclear warfare and all that good stuff.
Yeah, good times.
And if other people are interested in hearing us talk about trauma-informed care in more depth at the Hawaii conference, so the National Partnership for Ending Interpersonal Violence, npeiv.org, and the Institute of Violence and Abuse Institute of Violence, Abuse, and Trauma, IVAT. There's an international trauma summit in Hawaii. So
when is that?
That is mid-April, April 16th through the 20th.
You could probably look up International Trauma Summit.
Yeah,
Honolulu.
IVAT, Hawaii Trauma Summit. And that,
awesome.
We hope people will join us there so we can talk and help people support with self-care.
Well, I'm sure a lot of people there need some self-care right now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's the only one they get this week. So.
My heart goes out to them.
Well, thank you for joining us, and thank you all for joining us as well.
It's been a great episode. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Have a good night. Bye, everybody.